Hey, Gotham Geek Girl here, and it's time for another review. Dune Part 2 is a visually thrilling sci-fi epic masterpiece and a must-watch on the big screen. I absolutely loved it. The film is massive, mind-blowing. It's less complex with much better pacing than the first one, better character development. It expands the Dune movieverse with culminating powers. Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of the beloved sci-fi series, it's a great way to introduce new viewers to Frank Herbert's revolutionary 1965 novel. I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna say I did not love part one, and I'm not familiar with the book, so I went in completely fresh, and I absolutely love part two. Dune Part Two is even better than the first film. The stakes feel exponentially higher. The power struggles are even more intricate, and fantastical. The narratives are more well thought out, and you actually care much more about the characters this time around. The on-screen world building is much richer, and the visuals are even more epic and stunning. The epic blockbuster picks up just moments after the first film, and it not only advances but enhances the story on every level. The first film served more of like an introduction, and it set up the catalyst of events. So the sequel to Dune, which came out in 2021, is the second of a two-part adaptation of the 1965 novel Dune by Frank Herbert. It follows Paul Atreides as he unites with the Fremen people of the desert planet Arrakis to wage war against the House Harkonnen. So Timothée Chalamet is returning. So is Rebecca Ferguson, Josh Brolin, Stellan Skarsgård, Dave Bautista, Stephen McKinley Henderson, Zendaya, Charlotte Rampling, and Javier Bardem all reprise their roles from the first film, with Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken, and Léa Seydoux joining the ensemble cast. So Rebecca Ferguson's pregnant lady Jessica and Paul Atreides, Timothée Chalamet, are the sole survivors of House Atreides after their family and army were murdered in a sneak attack on Arrakis. So Oscar Isaac, we know, died in the first film. Now they're ready for revenge for his family, and Paul begins helping the Fremen to stop the mining of spice on Arrakis. So, like I mentioned, it's a 1965 epic science fiction novel. It was originally published as two separate series in 1963 to 64, Dune World, and in 65, The Prophet of Dune in Analog Magazine. Tied with Roger Delany's This Immortal for the Hugo Award for Best Novel. It won the inaugural Nebula Award for Best Novel in 1966. It's the first installment of the Dune Chronicles, and it even influenced the creation of Star Wars. It's one of the world's best-selling science fiction novels of all time. Maybe one day I'll go back and read it. But back to the films, part one is really more of a setup and an introduction to the characters and the clashing houses. Dune 2, like I mentioned, really, gets a little more in depth. It's set in the distant future in a feudal interstellar society in which the various noble houses control planetary fiefs. So it tells the story of young Paul Atreides, who's played by Chalamet, and his family accepts the stewardship of the planet Arrakis. So while the planet is it's in hospital and it's sparsely populated, it's like a desert wasteland. Their only source is melange. It's a spice and it's a drug that extends life and it enhances mental abilities. So melange is also necessary for space navigation, which requires a kind of like a multi-dimensional awareness and foresight that only the drug provides. So it can only be produced on Arrakis. So control the planet, it's very dangerous undertaking. The story explores the multi-layered interactions of politics, religion, ecology, technology, and human emotion as the factions of the empire confront each other in a struggle for the control of Arrakis and its spice. So part two picks up right where things left off. Paul is fulfilling his mother's prophecy, as his dreams are really starting to make more sense and come to fruition. Timothée Chalamet stars as Paul Atreides. He's the exiled Duke of House Atreides, who is called Modib by the Fremen. In the sequel, we see so much more depth from Timothée Chalamet. He shows a little more acting chops. As he struggles between like love, loyalty, and fulfilling his duties, we see Paul's journey from a reluctant hero to the messiah of the Fremen and the planet Arrakis. Timothy portrayed his character effortlessly. He speaks fluent Fremen. He really convinces viewers of Paul's dedication to the Fremen. We see some solid fight scenes and a lot more range from Timothy in the second installment. He shows compassion, love, anger, and he really comes to terms with fulfilling his duties and not only protecting his mother, living up to her expectations, and protecting the Fremen. And he puts everything before himself, as we really see at the end of the movie. So the sequel does a much better job of making you care about really all of the individual characters, especially with Zendaya. She gets a lot more screen time as a young Fremen warrior Chani. She's also Paul's love interest. So the two begin to fall in love. The relationship develops rather quickly, a little too quickly, but we were introduced to her character in part one in Paul's visions. In part one, she was generally only in like the last 10 minutes of the film. All of her other appearances were premonitions. In part two, Zendaya is a much more prominent, fleshed out character in the sequel. We see some really like great battle scenes with her where she really takes charge, proving herself to be a valuable warrior. She questions everything and she never shifts from her beliefs. It was a really cool scene I liked with like a super gun where you really see her like fighting chops. It's packed with complex and intricate twists and turns that add depth to the mother-son survival stories and Dia's suspicions. Battling houses in a very like Game of Thrones fashion. There's a comedic effort from the religious warrior Javier Bardem, and that adds to the mystery of the prophecy. So Rebecca Ferguson returns as Lady Jessica. She's Paul's Ben Gesserit mother, and concubine to Paul's late father and the predecessor of Leto Atreides. So Lady Jessica's a bit frightening this time. She's definitely one of the most complicated characters in Dune. Like her son, she's a product of centuries of genetic breeding by the Bene Gesserit, an ancient school that teaches women how to develop superhuman mental and physical abilities. Spoiler warning, she's revealed to be pregnant with a daughter. And this will somehow tie in much later. Anya Taylor-Joy made a 2-second cameo, but that's going to be part of some prophecy. Originally, it was supposed to be a daughter, but she groomed Paul to fulfill it anyway and to give the Duke Oscar Isaac a son. So another major reveal is that Jessica is also revealed to be Baron Harkonnen's daughter. I did not expect this. Neither the Baron nor Jessica were aware of this fact, and things really take a turn when Jessica drinks the water of life, as it gives her the powers of a Reverend Mother, the highest rank of her order, and establishes her as a religious figurehead like among the Fremen. I'll get into the white savior tropism in a bit. Back to the characters, Josh Brolin returns as Gurney Halleck, the former military leader of House Atreides, and he's kind of like Paul's mentor. Um, I think this really helps Paul believe in himself as Gurney returns and he's still alive, because he was a really prevalent part of his training, especially after Paul lost his father. Brolin's a lot of fun to watch on screen. He's usually a badass and he makes for a great fighter. He goes up against Dave Bautista, who's Glossu Raban Harkonnen, and he's the brutish nephew of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen and the older brother of Fade Ratha. There's like a quick fight scene with Gurney. I wish Bautista wasn't killed off so quickly. I wish we got a little more from his character. But on to the villains. Austin Butler plays the more corrupt, outlandish, and unhinged brother of Fade Rutha Harkonnen and Baron Vladimir Harkonnen's youngest nephew and the planned successor of House Harkonnen. Butler steals the spotlight. He's a freakishly spoiled, power-hungry tyrant. He has like a bald head. They're creepy, like cannibalists, the Harkonnens. I love seeing him as a villain, and I really want to see more of him in these type of roles. We also see Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. He returns to the head of House Harkonnen. He's the sworn enemy to Atreides and the former steward of Arrakis. I knew I recognized him as one of my favorite childhood movies with The Glass House. I feel like Stellan is always like powerful and his family is incredibly talented. Baron's a memorable evil villain, and the character's floating like adds to the unsettling nature of his portrayal. Just the imagery of Baron like bathing in oil, it serves to emphasize his dangerous and predatory nature. He's very creepy and eerie. Charlotte Rampling returns as Gaius Helen Moham. She's the Reverend Mother and the Emperor's truthsayer. She reminds me of a lot of Marjorie Tyrell from Game of Thrones. Like she's just playing chess from the sidelines and the shadows, manipulating both parties. She doesn't take any sides. Then we get to the comedic relief, Javier Bardem. He returns as Stilgar. He's the leader of the Fremen tribe at Sietch Tabr. He's charming. He's a loyalist. He's a true believer, and he really makes the film a tad more lighthearted with his comedic chops and jokes. He's pretty funny. He really shows like tremendous dedication in his use of Fremen and Fremen culture. Stilgar was a formidable Fremen warrior, and he later becomes the leader of a rebel group. He's a fierce warrior. He's fearless, respected, and a skilled sand rider on the huge worm things. So new to the cast, we have Florence Pugh. She's Princess Arulan, the Emperor's daughter. Christopher Walken is Shaddam V, I believe, the Padishah Emperor of the known universe and head of House Carino. Léa Seydoux is Lady Margot Venering, and she's a Ben Gesserit also and a close friend of the Emperor. So they all play a bigger part. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot going on in the next film with them. With the whole, another spoiler, Timothy has to leave Zendaya's character. I'm going to get into the elements that come off as white savior, especially amongst the casting decisions and the undercurrents of colonialism and imposed mysticism. The books by Herbert were heavily influenced by Lawrence of Arabia. Essentially, Arrakis is Arabia, and the Fremen are a representation of the Arab tribes. Although Villeneuve handles the themes of heroism versus psychopathy in Dune 2 quite well, Spoiler ahead, Paul grapples with his duty when his mother tells him. There's a big reveal. Finding out he's part Harkonnen, there's a lot of complex turns that add depth to the mother-son survival story. It's packed with outstanding, staggering visual shot on location in Budapest, Italy, Jordan, and Abu Dhabi. More narrative-driven, exciting prophecies, battle scenes, really cool tech and weaponry. As I mentioned, the use of language was immaculate, and it was really believable, and it showed true dedication from the cast because they legitimately were fluent in the film's fictional language, Fremen. The director commissioned a new, fully developed language for the actors of the sequel, and all the actors went to a Fremen school. So there were really cool scenes and visual effects, like Paul proving himself to be the Fremen and that he must be able to ride the Shah-Halud, aka the sandworm riding. That was done very well, and Villeneuve had to get creative with creating the scene of how a Fremen actually jumps onto a sandworm. The great beast with high speed and tremendous power, the creature can actually survive the harsh desert planet of Arrakis. So the scene of Paul's sandworm ride was filmed practically on a production unit separate from the main one. Chalamet is said to have the scene estimate over 3 months, I believe they said, to film, with individual shots occurring over a span of 20 to 30 minutes. The actual sandworm wasn't built, so there were no reference shots. The production team designed a small portion of the worm on set, and the actors had to physically visualize and imitate riding the sandworm. Butler and Chalamet had separately trained with a Kali instructor in Los Angeles for the climatic battle between Paul and Fred Rotha. And they were excited to do the scene and immediately began practicing once they later met in Budapest, and they performed the scene by themselves, including like four wide camera shots while Chalamet delivers his monologue. And Ferguson had cited Lady Jessica undergoing the Reverend Mother process as her favorite scene, working with like contortionists for the scene and comparing it to an Exorcist film. So these scenes were done very well. You can tell they paid close attention to detail. Absolutely outstanding, staggering visual shot and location. The film was entirely shot using digital IMAX certified cameras, with new filming locations and sets being used to avoid repetition. So we have entirely new sets. More narrative-driven, exciting prophecies, intense battle scenes, advanced tech and weaponry, superb visuals paired with Hans Zimmer. Of course, if he's on it, it's amazing. He composes the film score. It's like a mesmerizing intensity. So he also did the previous film, and he composed over 90 minutes of music prior to the announcement of the film to give Villeneuve an inspiration when writing. So two singles were actually just released, I believe, last week. A Time of Quiet Between the Storms and Harvester Attack. The full soundtrack album was released on February 23rd. The attention to detail and the costume designs are fantastic, especially amongst the different like classes and territories. So Jacqueline West, she's one of Hollywood's most respected costume designers, and she has 4 Oscar nominations, including the first Dune. And it's funny because she originally said that sci-fi wasn't her thing, but she was convinced by Villeneuve to give it a chance. And she said in interviews that she took inspiration from the Tuareg people, hope I'm saying that right, as well as old paintings of the Middle East for the interior costumes on Arrakis. She also spent time in Morocco, and she was influenced by the Tuareg's robes and face wraps. She actually told Deadline that an example of her attention to detail was a challenge of recreating the still suits. So the suits worn by the Fremen on Arrakis, it had to protect them, from the wearer from like the elements and recycling the body's moisture. So it had to have all the pumps and the tubing somehow visible so you could actually believe that it could do that. So you can tell that they put a lot of great care into this franchise, from the production to the costumes to the visuals to the cinematography to the lighting, the fight sequences, and especially the cast. And the director has said he's not rushing to shoot part 3. He rather put great effort. He rather put great effort into giving audiences top-notch quality. And I respect that. The second one is set to be released in the US on March 1st. And I highly recommend you watch this on the big screen. You have to see this 40X, IMAX, just see it in a theater. It's beautiful. One of my favorite films so far this year. Go check it out.